you are close with the Ellisons, who are trying to stop a merger between Warner Brothers, Discovery, and Netflix. This deal could change the makeup of the media as we know it. Are you personally going to get involved in that deal?
I haven't been involved. I must say, I guess I'm considered to be a very strong president. I've been called by both sides. It's the two sides. But I've decided I shouldn't be involved. The Justice Department will handle it.
Okay. In what way? Just looking at it to see if it's
regular?
regular?
Make a decision. I mean, there's a theory that one of the companies is too big and it shouldn't be allowed to do it, and the other company is saying something else about, they're knocking the hell out.
But you're not going to interfere, even though you're close with the Ellisons.
They're beating the hell out of each other, and there'll be a winner.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York, 3 weeks later, and today there does appear to be what Donald Trump would call a winner. Would it surprise you to discover that it's one of Donald Trump's closest buddies or his buddy's Nepo baby son, or that as a result, Donald Trump could soon expand his influence over the country's media ecosystem, including something that has been Donald Trump's trigger for a decade, CNN? On Monday, we told you about that high-stakes bidding war for Warner Brothers Discovery. It appears Netflix had the upper hand over Paramount, even as Donald Trump demanded Netflix remove former U.S. Ambassador Susan Rice from its board over criticism she made of his administration. At the time, the CEO of Netflix made clear, quote, "This is a business deal, not a political deal." But since then, in quick succession, Warner Brothers suggested it was taking a serious look at a new bid from Paramount. The Netflix CEO met with officials at the White House, and late yesterday, Netflix said it would not counter that bid, paving the way for Paramount to close the deal. We began the hour with Donald Trump answering for his friendly relationship with the Ellisons, that is Larry Ellison, the billionaire, and his son, David Ellison, the owner of Paramount, seen here giving a thumbs up as a guest of this week's State of the Union address. That looks comfy. Go figure. This afternoon, Politico reports this, quote, "Within hours of the agreement, some industry executives and Democratic lawmakers here said they worry that Trump's pressure campaign, including the Susan Rice threat, could reshape how political power is wielded over the entertainment industry. Quote, unequivocally, yes, it will set a bad precedent for Hollywood." That's Assemblymember Nick Schultz, a Burbank Democrat, talking to Politico. Quote, "I don't have a bone to pick with Paramount per se. My concern remains the influence of the Trump administration. That influence could perhaps include a hand in what happens next at CNN, as we said, a frequent and constant trigger for Donald Trump." And on the topic, The Times reports this, quote, "Mr. Ellison's intentions for the channel remain unclear, but the development has caused some shudders within the CNN newsroom, where the chief executive, Mark Thompson, felt compelled to issue a memo shortly after Netflix announcement. Within CNN, though, reporters and producers have expressed concern that their newsroom's independence, a point of pride, could be compromised in the event that Paramount absorbs the company. Concerns over the independence of America's media ecosystem, including news, is where we begin the hour. Political analyst, host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is here with us for the hour. Also joining us, executive editor of Deadline.com, Dominic Patton, is here. And with me at the table, Oliver Darcy. He's the author of the newsletter Status, which covers all things media. This is where I first read about this. Just take me inside what happened.
Well, we should be clear. What happened is something that should not happen in well-functioning democracies. What happened here is the president of the United States, no matter what he says, we watched that clip, I don't think anyone actually believes that he had nothing to do with this deal. He put the weight on the scales in favor of Paramount. And why did he do that? Because Paramount wanted to purchase all of Warner Brothers Discovery, not just the streamer and the movie studio like Netflix did. They wanted to purchase everything, including CNN. Donald Trump does not care about Hollywood programming. He does not care what movies Warner Brothers puts out, what movies Paramount puts out. I don't think he watches The White Lotus on HBO or Landmount on Paramount Plus. What he cares about is CNN. And that was an asset up for grabs, and he was certainly not going to pass up an opportunity to push it into the hands of an ally. And so what he did, what his administration did, or at least the MAGA movement did, was make clear that they were going to oppose a Netflix deal on antitrust grounds. Not that there weren't legitimate antitrust concerns, but I think everyone knew what was going on here, which was we were going to block this deal so that it ends up in an ally of the president's hands. And that's what you see today. So what's going to happen now is David Ellison is going to oversee CNN. It's likely that Barry Weiss, who he's installed as the editor-in-chief of CBS News, is going to be positioned to lead CNN. And certainly what's going to happen is this network is going to end up softening coverage of Donald Trump, because that's what they basically bargained for here. That's the whole deal, was we give you CNN and you give us this entire deal.
Dominic, what could go wrong?
Well, I'm going to give you a name that may be not so known outside the Golden State. Rob Bonta. Rob Bonta is the Attorney General of California. And Rob Bonta, just mere hours after everyone was popping champagne corks down at the Paramount lot, put out a statement. This is not a done deal. DOJ back in D.C. might be signing the checks and checking the boxes. But here in California, the Attorney General and the Justice Department here, they still have a probe of this. They're investigating this. And today he revealed, in a response online to actor Mark Ruffalo, who has his own issues about this, that he's talking to other AGs about this. So in actual fact, the multi-levels of government, which have been to our benefit in many ways over the past year for some, might actually be coming to the rescue.
That's fascinating. Tim Miller, your thoughts on where this stands this afternoon?
Yeah, we could do about an hour on this, Nicole. There's so many kind of layers.
We have the time. Let's do it.
Because, I think that the initial reaction everybody has is right, which is, I think, with concerns about consolidation of media corporation in the hands of Trump's allies, right? And what that means for CNN, that matters to a lot of people. I feel pretty happy that the Bulwark is independent. It's not going to matter that much to me. And I think we should talk about it, and it matters. But there are elements of the corruption of this deal that, I think kind of get lost a little bit in this that I just want to talk about. I mean, for starters, this is not, I think it was Oliver said, this is not how things work in a functioning democracy. This isn't how things work in a functioning capitalist system either. This isn't really capitalism.
Right. It's an oligarchy, right.
Yeah. Warner Brothers Discovery has a ton of debt, a massive amount of debt, and more debt than Paramount has in money. So how is Paramount buying this, right? Netflix has enough money to buy this. How is Paramount buying it? Well, they're debt financing it from the dad of the Nepo baby, Larry Ellison, the friend of Trump, one of the richest guys in the world, and from a bunch of foreign countries, Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So it's a bunch of foreign entities and Trump's oligarch buddy that are debt financing this company because they want to control the media outlet. That's what is happening here, right? It is not as it's not as if Trump just put his thumb on the scale, in kind of an even Steven situation because he liked one owner better than the other. That would be bad. That would be a Banana Republic type situation. But it's far worse than that. The scale of it, and then you lay in the free speech side of this. How are you going to act if you're a board member of some other multinational who might have issues before the government over the next year or two, after you've just watched what happened this week, where Susan Rice talks on a podcast, and the next thing you know, the president of the United States threatening her to get fired, and helping usher in their competitor, to get a business with the help of the Saudis and the Qataris. I think it would be rational for a lot of people who are in business to decide they don't want to, they're not going to speak out about stuff. So as a result of this deal, there's some real issues down the road with CNN that folks we'll see how that plays out. But already right now, immediately, it's a chilling of free speech, and there's even more power put into the hands of both Trump's buddies and these foreign entities that he's doing these crypto deals and these other deals with. It's crazy. Why is America the junior partner now under Trump to Qatar and to the UAE? Why do we need Qatar and the UAE to bail out, American companies and the president's family? That's the situation that we're in right now, and it's not a pretty one.
I'm not ready to go to silver linings. I would agree with Tim that there are some, and we'll get there. But on this layer of corruption, I mean, we spent 9 years trying to cover the impact of the end of the rule of law, which is essentially what Trump ran on. It's a lot easier to see it play out in reality. And to Dominic's point about state AGs, I hope that's right. But Trump makes clear in news cycle after news cycle that the DOJ in Washington works for him.
Yeah, and I think that's why the Ellisons are so confident that they can get this closed by September 30th, or they'll have to pay a fee to Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders, and that's called ticking fee. It's going to keep going and going until they get this deal done. And they're confident it's going to close because it seems like, there's been a wink and a nod, maybe a handshake behind the scenes between Donald Trump and David Ellison. David Ellison was in the White House meeting with Donald Trump earlier this month. It's pretty clear that Donald Trump wants this outlet to go to David Ellison. I mean, he basically said so, Nicole. In December, he said any deal that includes Warner Brother Discovery needs to include CNN switching ownership hands. And he said that CNN, he derided CNN. He said it's a lie, a network that peddles lies, which is not true. He smeared the network, and he made it clear that he wants it to change hands. And now it's going to go into David Ellison's hands. And I think Tim made a good point, though. There's so much corruption here that we lose sight of another big thing, which is the Saudi Arabian government, which literally just ordered the butchering of an American journalist, a Washington Post journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, a few years ago, not like a decade ago, just like a few years ago. Mm-hmm. They're now going to be a part owner of the world's most recognizable news brand. That alone, would typically be considered disqualifying. But there's so many layers to this. There's so much corruption involved in this that that's not even getting much attention today.